But in the meantime, we do want to talk about an issue I know is near and dear to so many Canadians, and that is the issue of affordability and the way in which it's being discussed and debated by politicians. To help me do that, this evening, the front bench is here. First up, Dan Moulton. He's former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And Marika Walsh is a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Welcome back, everyone, to our originally intended theme of the day. Like I say, we do continue to track that breaking news, and any developments we'll make sure our audience is apprised of. But Kathleen, on this whole, I saw you listening in the corner there to my interview with Minister Gould. It is fascinating the way this has all evolved to, we're being productive now, we're calling in the grocery store CEOs. I don't really still understand what's going to happen to prices by Thanksgiving, but what's happening here behind the scenes? Like, what is the strategy being employed by the federal government right now?
I don't know. Did they just wake up from the past 20 months? Like, honestly, because we've seen grocery prices rise for 20 months. We saw it in 2020, like 3 years ago almost. The Liberals and the Conservatives voting against the kind of measures they're threatening the CEOs with. So in 2020, if you recall, fall 2020, the New Democrats put forward a excess profit tax on those corporations kind of possibly benefiting from the pandemic at the time. They voted against that. They could have taken action back then. So it is kind of interesting to see this stand. So leads you to the question you just asked me, why now? Well, yeah, polls. Also, needing to take action and show Canadians that they have an agenda. I'm hearing, you're probably hearing too, that the Liberals are trying to come back fighting, that they're retooling staffing levels, that they're in it to 2025, and they're looking for some gain. And we're seeing some evidence of that. And I would say a couple things. One, tomorrow we're going to see the consumer price index numbers. They're going to come out early in the morning. That's the basket of goods that the Stats Canada judges how much inflation has risen. And so really they're getting ahead of that tomorrow, and all the complaints that we would see in question period about rising inflation. Once again, the banks are pegging that inflation will rise. And so they drove the agenda here today until the other agenda came up, the breaking news came up. All of the questions were focused around lettuce and the cost of bread in the House. And I think they were successful at least doing something, seeing that trail of CEOs, you know, Galen Weston with his backpack on. He's a very recognizable figure. To see him being called on the mat, that is the power of government. Opposition members can actually only bring them to committee, kind of slap them around, maybe ask them questions. But they brought those CEOs with basically, what was it, 72 hours notice or maybe a little bit more? You know, so they're doing something. Whether they'll actually, I mean, I don't love the idea of this, we're going to stabilize prices. What does that mean? A chicken at $26 for 3 or 4 breasts, you know? I don't want food prices stabilized there. So, and I don't think Canadians want that either. So they're going to have to deliver, and it's going to be hard.
Well, I guess that's what's so interesting, Dan, when we were convening a week ago, you were saying basically something similar, right? You guys have to do some stuff, not just respond to what the Conservatives are pressing you on. They have now done some stuff. They're obviously getting a lot of scrutiny from you know, members of the media like myself about why now and why not earlier. But what is the pressure on them from your vantage point to deliver?
Yeah, I think that they have a real requirement right now to demonstrate that the Prime Minister and his government are in touch with Canadians about the issues that are most top of mind for them. So, as you point out, that is issues of affordability. It's food affordability, it's housing affordability, it's affordability that increasingly feels unattainable for Canadians across the country. And so demonstrating that the Prime Minister and his government are in touch with those challenges that Canadians are facing every day is the political imperative of this government right now. Pierre Poilievre, he may not have a plan to deal with any of those problems, but he's certainly presenting himself to Canadians as someone who understands those challenges and may be better positioned to deal with them than the current government. And that's resonating. And so I think the government's waking up to the reality that they have to change the channel on this. They have to get up off the mat. They're doing just that. Kathleen points out their ability to haul these CEOs to the delight of Canadians in an uncomfortable position. I think that is an important political move. The reality is that this is not going to lead to any substantive change in prices anytime soon. You asked the minister if we'll see lower prices on turkeys at Thanksgiving. I think that's unlikely. I think the reality is that no government is going to be very well positioned to deal with this problem. And in many ways, all parties involved today in what is realistically political theater It's about getting past this issue being top of mind. It's about getting to the other side of it and hoping that when an election comes in 2 years, Canadians are voting on a different subject.
I think that's a very honest answer, Shakir. Is this issues management, basically?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw this, I viewed it as strictly PR, right? I mean, Kathleen mentioned Jagmeet Singh tried this a few months ago. I mean, this is pretty much the same thing with other cameras in the room. But I think for the Liberals, listen, I do think it's a good political strategy. At the end of the day, there's data that shows that people connect high food prices with corporate greed. And I think the Liberals are riding that wave and trying to say, you know what, if that's a narrative that's out there, let's try to call on the CEOs and say, do something to show Canadians we're on top of this issue. Ultimately, for the Liberals, it's really about just showing Canadians you're also seized with the same issues that they care about. I think for several months, they were sleepwalking on serious policy files, right? And now they find themselves in all these crisis situations, and they're doing their best to try to say, okay, you know what? We realize you guys are really upset. We realize we haven't done anything. So let's try some new measures. And calling in CEOs is going to win a lot of appeal. People love when you beat on big, bad corporations, but ultimately results matter. And I think that's going to be the hill they don't climb over. They're not going to get the results they want, but in terms of a comms and an optics perspective, I think they're going to get good comms, they're going to get good photos out of this, but they're not going to get the results that are going to make Canadians happy.
Yeah, I think Shakir has a point. I mean, the comms has been, no matter the amount of interviews I get, where there's no answers. I get that the headline is still Ottawa compelled the CEOs to get here. But to Shakir's point, they set their own deadline for results to be delivered by, right? Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So that's not far away. That's like a few, it's right around the corner. If Canadians go to the grocery store and let's say a turkey's even more than it was last year, it makes it even harder, I think, for them to navigate it.
Well, beyond that, they're confused about what the result is supposed to be. The Prime Minister said prices need to be stabilized and then lowered, and that plan needs to come by Thanksgiving. And today, we did not hear that lowering promise repeated from the Innovation Minister, only that they would stabilize prices and go from there. So I think that is actually exactly the question. Is this PR or a photo op to get through the day and sort of give them another sort of own goal in a few months, or can they actually deliver? So far, there's absolutely no details to show how they get there and what metrics they will follow, what even they will measure as the stabilized, what is stabilized prices? We can all assume what that is, but they're not really putting any clear details around it.
I mean, the reason for that, Kathleen, is that so they don't have to meet them when Thanksgiving comes, right? They can show some progress maybe and be able to say, okay, we have delivered to a certain degree on what we talked about. And to Shakir and Dan's points, we were at least talking about the stuff that matters to you.
Sure, but when you issue manage this situation and you say game it out, you could say, right, this perp walking of the CEOs is going to be great for one day. But you know what's not going to be great? On Thanksgiving, when Mary and Betty and Joan and Bob and Sam go to the store and start taking those photos and putting them on Twitter or whatever we call it these days, X, and say, hey, my turkey's not cheaper. So from a risk management point of view, they actually are putting so much on the line because Canadians themselves will be able to evaluate by taking out their grocery bill and say, guess what, not cheaper, right? And that all you'll see is that kind of feedback from Canadians. So that's a risky proposition from the government's point of view. Yes, the photo op was good. Yes, they brought the CEOs to task, and Canadians do want to take them to task. But what's going to happen on Thanksgiving Monday?
I feel like the risk-benefit analysis, though, Dan, is we keep plummeting because Canadians don't feel like we get it, or we do something that gives the impression right now that we do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the politics at play here. I'm not even sure that Canadians really go to the grocery store and think that Ottawa has a lot of impact on the items that are on the shelves. They see that as much more closely associated with the corporate profits that Shakir talked about. I would say that demonstrating that you understand that this is a problem, demonstrating that you are acting in an aggressive way with these CEOs is the political image the government needs to achieve. Beyond that, I actually don't know that there's a lot of policy that Canadians expect of them in this area compared to other issues like housing, where I think Canadians are far more readily looking to the federal government to actually take some decisive action, to actually introduce some policy to deal with housing in this country. So I think there's a political image game here at play more than really a policy one, to go back to my earlier point.
Shakir, last word on this to you.
Yeah, I know we're talking about Canadians, and Canadians obviously matter, but what else matters is caucus. And I think the Prime Minister rolled these measures out because he heard MPs say, you know what, my constituents are not hearing what we're doing to kind of make life more affordable. So I think the PM has bought himself some time with his caucus. He's going to have some conditional support from caucus, but if things don't improve with the Liberals in their polling, in the next 4 or 6 months, there's going to be more trouble. There's going to be more internal strife, and I'm not sure where they go next if they don't find solutions that Canadians really care about, if they don't put caucus get caucus acquired down a bit.
Kathleen, I'm looking to the side because
Can I
Kathleen's
just
about
say
to
one
jump
thing?
in.
Because the federal government could do one thing right now, which is fund a national lunch program for schools across the country. They could have gotten that going in the spring, and Canadian families across the country could have a lunch program in schools. That would not only help those who are food insecure, right? Those families who are facing that insecurity. It would alleviate a lunch packing problem for parents all across the country, and it would provide that kind of universal support. They could fund that. That could happen.
I did not have my money on you saying that.
I know, but that's an actual policy that they could implement right now.
I hope the
and it would
policymakers
help
are watching.
families who are food insecure.
Okay, I appreciate the point. I'm going to take a quick break.